Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? Please join me in welcoming the award-winning columnist and deputy editorial page editor for the Washington Times, Miss Deborah Simmons.
I eagerly accepted the invitation to be here this evening. I consider it an honor. Think of the opportunity presented by the HistoryMakers, a repository of stories, not one documentary, not a documentary series, but thousands, literally thousands of stories, 5,000 to be exact, and all archived into a searchable, digital archive that generations will be able to see. So imagine that. Tonight's title sponsor understood the importance of the HistoryMakers early on. Here to tell us more is William Edwards, Area Vice President for the Mid-Atlantic region and General Manager of this hotel, the Hilton, Washington.
Well, thank you. I want to welcome everyone this evening. We at Hilton Hotels Corporation are proud of the role we have played with the HistoryMakers in Chicago, Washington, elsewhere. We were there in the beginning. As a company, we are committed to diversity. As you can see, it's reflected in the entire employee force, our commitment to the DC community, and our support of tonight's program. I want to acknowledge and thank Floyd Pitts, the Senior Director of Diversity Programs for our corporation, who flew in today from California, and his colleagues to be at tonight's dinner. And with a different hat tonight as Vice Chair of the Board of Trade for the Washington region, I invite as my guest a group from the Small Business Partnership of the Board of Trade, which is a mentoring organization we bring through, and they're my guests tonight. And now the Reverend Barbara Williams-Skinner, will you do us the honor of blessing this dinner?
Let's pray. You might grab the hand of the person next to you in the spirit of the unity that we seek to bring in our world. Our Lord and our God, we pause right now to acknowledge you as the God of HistoryMakers past and present. You are the God of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. You are the God of Martin, Malcolm, Medgar Evers, and Mary McLeod. You are the God of Rosa Parks, Coretta Scott King, and Dorothy Irene Height. Lord, tonight we come into your presence because you are the greatness and the power, and apart from you, we have no energy to even make history. We join together tonight, and we thank you for those who are ordinary vessels that you have used to do extraordinary work, the people we honor tonight. And we praise you especially for Juliana Richardson, whose brilliant capturing of history in the making helps us to remember our historic greatness. We thank you that tonight she makes us know that love is still more powerful than hate, and that we must continue to model the enduring power of love in action through our service, because love in action never gives up. It cares more for others than self. It does not want what it doesn't have. It doesn't strut. It doesn't have a swell head, doesn't force itself on others, does not me first, is always seeking the truth and looking for the best, because love never fails. We ask you now, Lord, to bless the food we are about to eat, that it would nourish our bodies, that we might more vigorously serve you in a world so desperately in need of healing, help, and hope. It is in your matchless, marvelous, and wonderful and mighty name we pray. Amen.
Here to welcome you to this salute is someone who really needs no introduction. He's a living legend in his own right. While Atlanta is his birthplace and New York has often been his workplace, Washington, D.C. is his home. We want to thank him for agreeing to be the chair of tonight's event. He is a lawyer, a civil rights giant, a power broker, and now a banker. And his name is Vernon Jordan.
Thank you, Deborah. It is my great honor to welcome you to this first time in Washington HistoryMakers event. I am really quite privileged and honored to be chairman of this event, but I should tell you that I did not come by this job lightly. My daughter, Toni Bush, was punching me from the right. Juliana Richardson was punching me from the left, and my wife, Ann, was in the corner encouraging both of them. And so I had no choice but to say yes, and I am happy to have this honor and, to some extent, this responsibility. What is so significant to me is that when I was a history student in college, I read a historian named Ulrich B. Phillips. Ulrich B. Phillips wrote a lot about slavery, and he wrote about how happy blacks were in slavery, that they were happy and content and peaceful. And I've been mad with Ulrich B. Phillips since I was in college. And the problem was there was no HistoryMakers to tell our story to. Well, we now have the HistoryMakers to help us tell our story. I have been privileged in my career to do many interviews. But the video that I did for HistoryMakers was exciting, it was fun, it was restorative, it was inspiring. And when Juliana Richardson wants to interview you, she makes sure it happens. She calls your office 1 time, 20 times, 100 times. And if you are on her list, you will succumb. And so we owe to Juliana Richardson a great round of applause and appreciation for conceptualizing this idea and for implementing it. Let's give her a big hand. So thank you for being here. Thank you for helping Juliana Richardson and this board of young people to help us to tell our story and to sing our song. Thank you very much.
I'm Maureen Bunyan from ABC 7 News. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to be sharing this wonderful and historic evening in celebration of the HistoryMakers. I am very happy to be here. I see so many of my friends, and I knew they were up to doing some great things in Washington, but I didn't know that one day they would be making history. So I'm really happy to be here to help you celebrate. I want to do as my first job here at the podium to let you know about some of the people who make up the HistoryMakers National Advisory Board. I would like to name them, and I'd like to ask them to stand, and of course, you know the drill. Please hold your applause until after everybody stands. Please join me in welcoming Northern Trust Bank's Deborah Thomas, Smith Wiley and Company Sharon Morrow, the National Archives Walter Hill, the Library of Congress's Adrian Cannon, journalist Roger Wilkins, educator Walter Leonard, and Hilton Hotel's Floyd Pitts. Please give them a round of applause. Now, I'm wearing these glasses not because I really need them, but because you HistoryMakers are of an age when you probably use them, and I want to show my empathy with you. However, I also want to make sure I can read this properly. I give up. Now, it's a great pleasure to introduce one of the driving forces behind this evening and board member for the HistoryMakers, Miss Antoinette Cook Bush. Please welcome her.
I'm so pleased to be here, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Our attendance has been great. We've exceeded our goal. I want to take this opportunity to thank our HistoryMakers staff and volunteers and our planning committee. Everybody has worked very hard to make this happen tonight. I particularly want to thank Janelle Trader, Debbie Buggs, Bill Taylor, Racine Tucker Hamilton, E. Faye Williams, Carolyn Peachy, and Brenda Zimmerman. We could not have done this without the help of all of these people, and I, of course, want to thank Amy Billingsley, who is now serving as our regional coordinator in Washington, D.C. Many of you have talked to Amy, and you will be talking to Amy, and we hope that you will be supportive as Amy moves forward in scheduling more interviews as we continue to expand the HistoryMakers that we have today. We've raised over $150,000 tonight. We have a lot to be proud of and thankful for tonight, and we appreciate everybody's support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bush. Well, suffice it to say, as you can tell from the gathering here this evening and the enthusiasm, HistoryMakers is on a roll. You all know that it was started by Juliana Richardson in June of 1999, and it is now the nation's largest African-American video and oral history archive. The goal of HistoryMakers is simple: to save this important but little-known history one at a time, one story at a time, thereby amassing a priceless collection. In fact, in the entire history of the United States, there has only been one attempt to massively record the African-American experience, and that was the attempt made when the WPA interviewed 2,300 former slaves between 1936 and 1938. Largely envisioned and boldly conceived, the HistoryMakers is changing the paradigm of what is known about African American and, most importantly, American history. So tonight, we are saluting those in the Washington, D.C. area who have stepped forward to tell their stories. Over 80 of you are in this room. If I could tell the stories of each of the 80 of you, I could probably stay in broadcasting for the next 80 years, but we cannot do that, unfortunately. I know that we in the Washington area have been very, very fortunate to have so many outstanding, so many absolutely accomplished people who have not only accomplished in their fields, but also have accomplished for our community, and I'm very proud of all of you. I also want to let you know that we cannot share a clip, of course, of every one of you who are here tonight, but we do have a wonderful, wonderful selection of clips that we would like you to see now in this video.
Said my grandfather said, you know, Elmer should be going to school today. And my grandfather said, well, I'm keeping him out of school because I need him on this farm and what have you. And she said, I'll do his plowing. And she said, because I want him to go to school. And you know, she looked at me, she said, because I wanted me a teacher.
Shortly after college, my father worked as a reporter for the Afro and covered a lynching on the eastern shore of Maryland. And so that changed him to commit his life to the struggle for equality in this country.
I sat down to chair my first meeting at the board. I said silently, this is for you, Dad. It was like he didn't have a chance to finish it up, you know, his journalistic career. And I figured that for his kid to become chairman of the Pulitzer Prize Board was my tribute to him.
I remember calling my father, and I said, Daddy, so my last day was at ABC was yesterday, and there was like this horrible silence on the other end of the phone. And I said, well, I told you I was going to do this. Well, he was just, I could see him. He's a child of the Depression, and his daughter had gone to Harvard, and she'd been an executive at ABC News. What do you mean you're quitting your good job?
What I was really interested in was developing and honing my entrepreneurial skills. As you look back through my family, I've got one grandfather who was a self-employed undertaker. I have another grandfather who was a pastor, a preacher. I've got a father who was a dentist and an orthodontist, and I saw myself working for myself and being self-employed.
I was at UNC and I was told these are the kinds of people that we finance. And I looked around and I said, well, they're not the people that are successful. I looked out and I saw in communications back then, guys like Percy Sutton, Clarence Avant, Gene Jackson, they were the guys that were doing things. They were making real headway. And if you talk to them, they'll tell you hard stories about how they came up. And that nothing was given to them. Everything they got through hard individual effort. And I was convinced that you had to finance people and not businesses.
Well, we were the first people that I'm aware of who spoke to the National Science Foundation about commercializing the whole domain registration process. As you probably know, governments really were largely financing the internet and the internet explosion. The growth rate that we were achieving was such that we knew that was going to overwhelm. And so we talked to the National Science Foundation about fee for service. Let's create a scenario where those people who want domain names have to pay for those. And by the way, we split that between the National Science Foundation and Network Solutions.
And the more I got into it, the more I realized that what I really was pursuing was not simply an intellectual curiosity, an intellectual quest, but it was something that ultimately I'm going to have to ground myself in. And that's when I decided that I really was looking for kind of a complete immersion in that, and then ultimately was ordained as a Unitarian Universalist minister.
I said I was working at Miller's grocery store years ago. I'm talking when I'm 14 or 15. There was one lady, her name was, I never forget, her name was Miss Simpson. And she used to come into the store. She was one of the regular customers. And she said, young man, you should be a lawyer because you're nice and tall. That's what she said. You're nice and tall, you should be a lawyer. And I never forgot that. I never forgot that. I don't know what the motivating force was, but I knew when I started undergraduate school that I wanted to be a lawyer.
I really only focus on what I'm doing at that particular time. And I used to say that to my interns, that I could sit in the middle of Connecticut Avenue and continue drawing, with traffic going all around me, because if you're serious about what you're doing, there's no distraction powerful enough to stop you from making your art.
What has been a guiding force in my life from my high school days, which is inscribed under the photograph in my high school and my college yearbook. I would rather fail in a cause that will ultimately succeed than succeed in a cause that will ultimately fail.
They said, well, we want somebody to come over to visit us, exchange visits. And it should be William Layton, director of the Urban League here.
John Hickenbottom told me one night, Judge Hickenbottom, I had an argument in the court in Philadelphia, and when it was over, I made the mistake of going upstairs to visit him at 2 in the afternoon. I think I caught the 3 a.m. metro liner out of Philadelphia. But he talked long and hard about the need to try and help people as a lawyer and whatever else you do one-on-one.
But at that time in Washington, there were no blacks in front office jobs in any of the hotels. The only jobs a black could have in a hotel in Washington was as a maid or as a They didn't even have the waiters' jobs. They didn't have those. They had just a few jobs, mostly behind the scenes.
In 1962, the major firms, the big 8 firms, there were 8 big firms at that time, did not recruit blacks. They didn't have any. If they had any, it was a mistake, because the person happened to be very light-skinned, went to a, predominantly white school, and in effect passed.
I, prior to that, had made a 10-year agreement with GW saying, you support us and let us use your campus and let us raise money under your name for 10 years, and then we'll be off campus. Well, we beat the mark by a lot, and we beat the mark by 4 years. And in 1974, we opened as the Duke Ellington School of the Arts.
There was a passenger on the train, and he was talking about the fact that he wanted to go to Johns Hopkins University to get his master's, and he had been turned down. And the passenger, who has never been named, this interesting, the daddy never named him, said, well, why don't you go to Harvard? And Dad said, I can't afford to go to Harvard. He says, go up there and talk to whoever was president at the time. Tell him I sent you. And he got into Harvard University.
But he died in 1922, in the same year that my mother was born. And he tapped my grandfather, Carl, to run the paper. And Carl was a professor of German at Howard University at the time. And my grandmother was one of his students. And she's the co-founder of Delta Sigma Theta.
When he was the editor of the North Star, it's not like being an anonymous person. Now you're an editor and you've got all these different layers, and people look at the box, they know your name. Well, so-and-so is the editor of this publication. When he stepped out of the door of the Tillman building on the main street, they knew that's Frederick Douglass. That's the man who's been writing these inflammatory articles about abolition and about women's rights and so forth. So, he wore his badge.
As a history student, I'm in the bowels of American history working at the National Archives. And I knew if I was going to become this great historian I wanted to become, I needed to learn what was in these sources.
Oh, the other thing that Garth McDaniels did, he decided every year to have a spring festival. And that's how some of the people who later became stage people got their start. One of them was Cab Calloway, who was in the class behind me. The other was Ann Brown, who was famous for Porgy and Bess, and Avon Long, who was a classmate of hers and who also was in Porgy and Bess.
I'm in James Wells's class in the spring of 1952, taking a course, and along comes James A. Porter, and he stops, and he looks down at my work, and he looks at me, and he was such an eloquent, well-dressed gentleman, spoke almost like an Englishman. And he said, what is your name? And I told him. He said, are you an art major? And I said, no. And he looked at my work. He said, what is your major? And I said, history. He said, you don't belong over there, you belong here. I said, okay, and I went and changed my major.
But the piano was terrible. Pitiful. And at the end, the club owner came to dine, and that was when we finished the last set, and he said, oh, Miss Washington, big cigar. Oh, it was so wonderful. I hope you enjoyed our club, and we hope you consider coming back here again. And she says, about that damn piano. I said, what's wrong with it? She says, you know what you need to do? You need to tune it. She said, and then you ought to paint it. And then you should burn that sucker. And he called Count Basie played on that piano. She said, and that's why he played so few notes.
Join me in also saluting Attorney and activist Leo Roscoe Dellums, former Fisk University President Walter Leonard, State Senator and former Richmond Mayor Henry Marsh, corporate lawyer Singleton McAllister, attorney and activist Ife Williams, TV producer Paul Brock, first African-American Lieutenant Governor of Colorado George Brown, community activist Ramona Edlin, photographer Jason Michelow Johnson, Olympian Benita Fitzgerald Mosley, educational administrator Ruth Brett Quarles, TV commentator Armstrong Williams, theologian, canon Nan Arrington Pete, former IBM executive and school founder Kent Amos, psychologist and educator Ann Ashmore Hudson, physicist and engineer Clayton Bates, former UDC president Paul Cook, former government appointee Bernice Fletcher, journalist Dorothy Gilliam, economist and author Julianne Malveaux, teacher Thelma Jarman Grooves. A round of applause for them all, please, and thanking the ancestors.
What a difference a day makes, 24 little hours, brought the sun and the flowers where there used to be rain. My yesterday was blue, dear, today I'm a part of you, dear. My lonely nights are through, dear, since you said you were mine. What a difference a day makes. There's a rainbow before me. Skies above can't be stormy. Since that moment of bliss, that thrilling kiss, it's heaven when you find romance on your menu. What a difference a day makes, and that difference is you. What a difference a day makes, and that difference is you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like you to know that each Washington, D.C. history maker will receive one of these beautiful statues tonight. For those of you who don't get a chance to see it close up, let me describe the statue. First, it was designed by Chicago-based sculptor Preston Jackson, and it is a traditional African griot with her cornrows, her shapely figure, and she is standing aboard a slave ship with symbols that represent different disciplines. And of course, she's doing what a griot does. She's telling her story to all who will listen. It's a beautiful statue and a most unusual piece of art, in addition to being a statue and a sculpture. And I think you will all treasure this. Thank you so much to Mr. Jackson for his beautiful work for us. We also want you to know that this award and the sculpture was underwritten by the McDonald's Corporation. No one from McDonald's is with us tonight, but they are here with us in spirit, and we thank them for their gift to all of you history makers.
They were going around the table one day and they were saying what everybody wanted to be. And we got to her, she said, "Oh, I want to be a doctor." And I said, "I will never marry a woman doctor." And of course, I've lived to regret those terms.
And, you know, he was such a nice, kind person. I was really kind of amazed that he would even make a statement like that. And, you know, he said, "Oh, no, I'd never marry a man." But he's been my most avid, ardent supporter, really has encouraged me. And it's really become, in a way, a champion of women and women's rights.
I knew that I wanted to pursue medicine, so much so that in elementary school there were many teachers early on who would say, "No, you mean you want to be a nurse?" And I said, "No, I want to be a doctor."
When I said, "I'm going to be a lawyer, Mr. Maddox," he said, "Niggas aren't supposed to be lawyers." And so he is the ever constant reminder of the mindset that had such a huge impact on the life of my parents and my grandparents and black people in the South generally.
The first thing they did was join the Republican Party, all right? And when they joined the party, they went after filling out all the wards and precinct assignments, and it became a pattern that the vice chairman of all county Republican committees would be black, all right? So we were raised to believe that you can't be a spectator at the political process. You got to be involved. And the plum for a black when I was coming up was to be the vice chairman of the senior party. I was elected vice chairman of the senior party in 1954.
They see themselves as leaders, and they see themselves as agents for change. And they present themselves that way, they act that way. And if you look back at the history of the university, you will see that an awful lot of those leaders in the larger movements all through society came from Howard University.
Spiro Agnew was the governor at the time, and he came to me and said, now, this is wrong. He said, now, you as the president of the college, you arrest those students. And I just assumed that the governor was the boss, but I said, nope, I knew them. I said, I wasn't going to arrest those students.
Education must now be a vehicle and an arena for increasing the will and capacity of people to transform towards justice. That's what it's all about. Now, whether it's a college, whether it is a public school, whether it is a corporate university or whatever, that's me.
They asked me to become the first deputy assistant secretary in charge of all the higher education programs. And there were some challenges there with the black colleges. So I accepted that assignment.
We must build Morgan for the institution that it is, institution that it was. And that's really been our mission here for the last 2 decades.
I could see a young man come to college very green and fresh. And I could watch his development from a green freshman to a more mature individual, being able to think and plan for himself.
My strength at the time was that I had been more recently in the private sector working for the United Negro College Fund. I knew the foundation world. I knew the folk who gave money in the foundation world because I had recent interactions with them as a member of the United Negro College Fund staff. So I knew the Mellon Foundation, I knew the Ford Foundation, I knew the people at Kellogg, I knew the major foundations who supported higher education.
Perrin Mitchell was putting through minority business enterprise programs, and then you had Shirley Chisholm, and you had, oh gosh, Charlie Rangel and John Conyers. These were real fighters. I mean, these were the real champions of civil rights, and it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful to be around them.
We brought a lawsuit based on this Supreme Court case and received a federal court decision that ordered Michigan to be redistricted because, as I had rightly guessed, the place that they would add a district would be in Detroit.
I was what they call the Special Assignment Officer for Joint and Special Activities. The White House, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Department of Defense, Secretary of the Army, and all those positions were positions that I had to find full colonels, which was senior managers, to go and work in those positions.
I worked as a foreign affairs officer in the Office of International Conferences, and I was assigned to head administrative services as a member of the delegation appointed by Lyndon B. Johnson for the 14th General Assembly of UNESCO.
The night of the election, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was there with everyone else celebrating in the the streets of Little Rock when the president was elected. And the very next morning, Ron Brown and I went and we paid a house call on Allen Chippewa.
I remember when I was presenting my credentials to be ambassador, and I stood and I heard the Beninese anthem and I heard the American national anthem, and I thought about the trip that I had made to Benin in the business class of a jet, and I thought about my ancestors who must have left West Africa bound and shackled in slave ships.
And he invited me to join the USIA, in other words, to become a diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service. He came to Durham and on a recruitment trip, and came to, in other words, to invite me personally, which is what he did. And my wife and I decided that why not try this? We also had been affected by John F. Kennedy's call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
And this young Negro soldier looked at the president and says, "Mr. President, for the first time in my life, I've been treated with respect, with dignity, as a first-class citizen." And President Johnson said he was moved by those comments, and that he and Lady Bird returned to the White House that evening and said their prayers. And then when he got up the next day, he just said his thought was that if these Negro soldiers can go to Vietnam and fight from an integrated bunker, that he would do everything possible to make sure that when they returned, that they could live in an integrated neighborhood.
People were building a movement, and we were reaching beyond the narrow confines of Tuskegee Institute and working together with sharecroppers in Macon County, Alabama, Lowndes County, Alabama, Perry County. So our worlds were expanding, and we were interrogating our own assumptions about who we were as students and who people were as sharecroppers.
So we had the task of trying to figure out what Dr. King could say in 7 minutes to sum up all of the drama of what had brought us to this day, from Montgomery to Birmingham. Montgomery in 1955 and Birmingham in 1963. So we had spent the weekend in New York before trying to figure out what he would say. He just wanted some help. And right up until the evening before, we said, well, you know, you can't leave, you got to do the canceled check piece. The Eye of a Dream has got to be done. And so in frustration, we sort of left him and said, look, I said to him, there's no way in the world you're going to cut it down to 7. Do what the Spirit says do, you know? And he did, and the world responded.
And join me in also saluting former HBCU President Leonard Haynes, former YWCA head Alexine Clement Jackson, President of Southeastern University Charlene Drew Jarvis, educator Sandra Ford Johnson, Baltimore City Administrator Nanette Kendall Mitchell, head of the Black Leadership Forum Yvonne Scruggs Leftwich, educator Hilbert Stanley, educational administrator William Smith, international affairs expert Carol Henderson Tyson, head of the Skinner Leadership Institute Barbara Williams-Skinner, National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise founder Robert Woodson, financial consultant H. Morel Fouché, NEA executive Al Tony Gilmore, former college football player and entrepreneur Darrell Hill, scholar of French Sandy McIntyre, Afro-American newspaper publisher John Jake Oliver, lobbyist Zena Pierre, and genealogist and historical researcher Barbara Dotson Walker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the founder and the executive director of the HistoryMaker, Ms. Juliana Richardson.
Thank you. I hope you're all having a nice time. It's really a pleasure being here in Washington, D.C. This is our first event outside of Chicago. And so we have a lot riding on things going well and being able to set up a regional presence here. I want to thank everyone who made this night possible. Tony Cook Bush, who I've known for years, who's a member of our National Board of Directors, Janelle Trader, who's become a trusted hand and stepped forward when we needed her, and Amy Billingsley, our DC coordinator. So I want to thank them all, because without them, the night would not have been possible. I also want to thank our sponsors, the Hilton Hotels and McDonald's. Hilton Hotels has been putting us up around the country for the last 4 years. Without that, we would not have been able to get to the number of interviews we have been at. We have been so very blessed. In fact, there's one person, I don't know where she is, but Crystal Foster. She has been with me from the beginning. She's a young African-American woman. Often when I go to an interview, because it's Crystal who talks to everyone, they're disappointed that I'm not Crystal. So if she's here, if she would raise her hand. In June of 1999, the HistoryMakers was simply an idea. That summer, I gathered a group of interns with the intent of answering 2 questions. One, did an archive like the one envisioned, did it exist? And if it didn't exist and one was created, would anyone be interested? And many at the time theorized no. But we've answered those questions. And now we have the nation's largest archive, as well as the HistoryMakers Education Institute and the HistoryMakers Speakers Bureau. We started doing interviews in Chicago, February of 2000, and ended the year with 70 interviews. Now our collection has grown to 800 interviews in 38 cities across the United States. We will cross the 1,000 mark this year, something I'm very proud of. And our website, essentially designed to be a sampling tool of the archives, has found its way into its own success, much to even our amazement and delight. We started out, for those of you who know anything about websites, with a mere 1,000 hits per month, which was not getting on anyone's record. And now we are generating 2 to 3.5 million hits per month. Our users are very interesting. They include over 100 colleges and universities, over 100 foreign countries, and even that's interesting because one of the top users was Lithuania, and we were in the office, we're trying to figure out where there's some black Lithuanians we didn't know about. Followed by the UK, Canada, and Germany. And then when it comes to government agencies, the Department of Education, the Department of Defense are large users of ours. And when it comes to news gathering agencies, it's CNN and WGN and ABC, Maureen, and the BBC. I encourage all of you, if you've not logged on to our website, to look at www.thehistorymakers.com. But that's really just the beginning. And what makes this time in our history so exciting is the ability to merge new technology with traditional oral history. So I want you to imagine 30,000 hours of searchable video, where with a few keystrokes on any subject, you will be led to any place in our archives. This is an amazing resource that's being made available because of a wonderful professor out of Carnegie Mellon who's been working for the last 8 years with licensed footage from the Department of Defense. And he has created this searchable archive video indexing system that he is donating to us. And we will start the process because thanks to a grant from the Organization of Library and Sciences, we will be able to start our processing 400 interviews in our collection and 1,200 hours of video. It is all really wonderfully exciting. I would like to take you back to a young girl who in 2nd grade, when she was asked, she was the only African American in her class, to talk about her genealogical background. And up to that point, the only thing that the class had covered about black people was slavery and George Washington Carver. And as a little black girl, it was hard for her to imagine that George Washington Carver had really done all those things with peanuts when all that we had been were slaves. And imagine that girl grown up and a sophomore at Brandeis University doing research on the Harlem Renaissance and Langston Hughes, and finding the rich treasure trove of the Schomburg Library, and realizing when she heard I'm Just Wild About Harry, and realizing that it was written by a black songwriting team, and feeling really she knew nothing about her history. Imagine that young girl, because that young girl was me. And it was those stories at the time when I interviewed Butterfly McQueen, who had starred in Gone with the Wind, and Lee Whipper, who was the oldest living black actor at the time, and they both were living in abject poverty up in Harlem. That it's the story that intrigued me. And I say to everyone who asks me why I started on this journey that I need all of you to participate in, is that it is about the story and we have a chance to make it happen. But yesterday, I was reading in the Washington Post about the opening of the World War II Memorial. And what caught my eye in that story is that 1,100 World War II veterans are dying every day. And they're trying to bring in busloads because before they die so they could see. But I could not help but think about my own people and our place in American history. You don't know how many times when I talk about this project that people assume that we're just talking about the modern-day civil rights movement. Our staff has been extremely blessed these past years and enriched, but listening hour after hour to amazing stories, and what you saw was not even a snowflake of our collection. And out of this, though, of this storytelling, we hope will emerge a new and more accurate history. Now, what is a history maker? History maker are many that are in this room tonight who by their own have made amazing strides in their life. But history makers are also those people, like the Pullman Porters, who were part of a movement, or they may be part of an organization or an event in time that is important to our history. So little is known about us, whether it's the Jack and Jill or the Boulay or the Urban League. None of these organizations have oral history projects, not even the Negro Baseball League Museum or the Motown Museum in Detroit. And we believe in collaborating, and I want to say thanks to Walter Leonard. He made an introduction, he and his wife Betty, to Fisk, and their oral history archives will be part of ours. And so those voices that have died, like Cab Calloway and them, will be part of our archives. So as I said, we are in a race against time. Each day, a piece of our history dies. Each day, one more life is lost and one more story gone. And our young people need it. Our country needs it. I think it will be the thing that heals the wound, because our history is not so much about black and white. but lots of amazing shades of gray. And in our archives are those who are no longer with us in some cases, and that's what I'm going to show. But their stories, because of them sitting down and taking the time to tell their story, will remain with us forever.
One Sunday, I was at the dinner table with my mother and father, and something came up, and I was talking about how great the Murphys were, and how wealthy they were, and how influential they were, you know. And my father said, William, said, let me tell you one thing. He said, you know, there are a lot of people who know the background of my family. He said, I was one of 13 children while the Afro was getting started. He said, we were evicted for the non-payment of rent 13 times, set out in the street in winter, summer, spring, and fall. And he said, there are a lot of people who knew how poor we were, so I wouldn't be bragging too much about that. And that taught me something.
After Uganda, I decided that my role was going to be to first leave something in each country where I was, and secondly, to try to make things better for my country and to make a difference, but in my own way, you know, my own small way. Charities, I worked with the charities, with the orphanages, and all that kind of thing. Each country organized something that still lives.
One of the major errors that was made in the 60s was that we were trying to cleanse. We were going through racial cleansing. Who's blacker than who, you know? And it became like parlor game because we were so frustrated in trying to get the things advanced that we wanted to advance, we turned on each other. And we were aided and abetted by the powers that be, like the COINTELPRO team. But we wouldn't have been vulnerable to that if we had had our own direction set.
We live in a world where this thing you can get here and this thing you can get here, and I want to be able to go there and forget color. Just go and get what I need. I don't think we'll ever come to that. There's always going to be some prejudice. But I would love to see us all on one wavelength. And that is to live and live the best that we can.
I wouldn't be standing here tonight if Dr. Charles Franklin hadn't taken care of me earlier. I've been on the road a lot, and so he and Alexa sort of took care of me and got me the medication I needed because I was having a bronchial attack earlier. This team is a team that works so hard, and they're the ones who are going to take forward what we are doing here. In DC, we're hoping that we can do 200 interviews a year, and we're going to start here, and then we're going to be moving to Atlanta and New York and LA and San Francisco and other places. But the last year, we're hoping that we will have 10 regions around the country, each doing 200 interviews, and that's where we are planning to get to our 5,000. A lot of times people ask me, is that where it's going to stop? And no, but we have to have an aggressive attempt to move things forward. And that's what we are about here tonight. And I want to thank, because had it not been for Janelle, Tony, and Amy Billingsley, we would not be here. And I want to thank our volunteers, and I want to thank our sponsors and our history makers.
History makers, tonight we salute you. We thank you for having taken the time to document your piece of this precious quilt. And I wanted to just add to what Juliana was saying. We in Washington know the importance of history. Some of us live it every day, and many of us observe it so often. And I want to add to her words to say that if you know of history makers who should be a part of this project, please let us know. I just offered a little bit of my time to Juliana to help her identify some people who are fortunately still with us, but who are quite along in age and really are an important part of our history. So please be a part of this effort. We are very, very pleased tonight to be able to present these awards to those of you who have joined the archives, and I congratulate all of you. Deborah?
As Maureen said, because we are journalists, we've had the pleasure of meeting, working, and socializing with a lot of today's honorees, history makers. And it's really important not only that we ask the ancestors to continue blessing the history makers, but that we give them some of our energy to help them continue on. We thank you for the lives you have led and the richness of your stories, because it is important that our children and the world know the value of our legacy. Thanks so much.
You'll have brains, you'll have a heart. Believe all these things, not because I told you to, but just believe in yourself. If you believe in yourself, believe in yourself as I believe in you.
We leave you with the words of Professor Howard Walkler from Carnegie Mellon, who said it best. The History Makers represents life and living and the richness of the African American experience. We thank all of you, history makers, who have stepped forward to tell your story. We hope that others, and you will encourage others to step forward as well. And we thank once again all of you for coming forward for tonight and supporting our efforts and our launch in Washington, D.C. Good night.
Believe what you feel and know you're right, because when you'll say it's yours, believe there's a reason to be. Believe you can make time stand still. Then know from the moment you try, if you believe, then you'll be there. Believe in yourself right from the start.